Let's talk to Jonathan Gullis and find out what he made of Prime Minister's questions. First up, Jonathan, very good afternoon to you.
Hello, Mike. How are you? Good to be on the home of common sense.
Very good indeed. Thank you for joining us. Nice to see the sun shining as well. It always comes out at the end of the nice show as if I've provided clearness and brightness to everybody. A couple of lively exchanges there. I particularly like the one where, what's his face, Starmer said, the only criminal investigation he knows about is the one where he got fined, which was slightly over the top. And then Rishi Sunak said, well, he's probably had more conversations with Sue Gray than I have, which was even better, I thought.
Well, I also enjoyed the fact that, bizarrely, Keir Starmer was trying to tell Rishi Sunak to get out of London. The irony of that is not lost on any of us. In fact, the only way that I know Keir Starmer could find Stoke-on-Trent is via Google Maps. And if he didn't have that, he wouldn't know. He'd think he was going to Stoke-Newington, not Stoke-on-Trent. So I think it's Sir Keir Starmer, QC, MP, KCB, whatever other letters come after his name, that needs to get out of North Islington, London, get away from the chai lattes and the quinoa, and actually go and speak to people in Stoke-on-Trent who think he is wrong on wanting to oppose stopping the boats. He's wrong on not wanting to support this government in trying to halve inflation, reduce debt and grow the economy. And it's just a shame that he has to virtue signal, jump on every political bandwagon going. Because as you know, Mike, I like to call him Mr. Flip-Flop, because that's what he is. He jumps from one view to the other, because wherever he thinks the way the wind's blowing, that's the one that's going to make him popular. Well,
that's right. And he still doesn't answer the important questions, like when did you first start talking to Sue Gray about appointing her to one of the top jobs inside your own party while she was still doing the investigation into Downing Street. The other reason he doesn't like leaving London is because whenever he doesn't always like what happens, like when he went to Bath and got kicked out of that pub.
Well, if he ever comes to Stoke-on-Trent, what they'll do is, I'm sure, protect him as much as possible, surround him with Labour Party members, surround him with members of the lobby where he can obviously perpetuate his nonsense on the TV and via the radio, but actually won't go and knock on doors in places like Stoke-on-Trent, because believe me, they haven't got many kind words to say about him. They remember this is the man who wanted to put Jeremy Corbyn in 10 Downing Street, then dumped him after he lost the election. They remember the man this is who they wanted a second referendum, was going to campaign for Remain in a second referendum, then pretended to be a Brexit hard man after losing the last election. They remember the fact this is a man who claims to have 10 pledges to become leader of the Labour Party and dumps them once he becomes that leader. This is a man they simply do not trust and do not know what he even stands for. I don't think he does. I think he wakes up to the morning and finds out what he's told to believe by his advisors.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And a fascinating story this morning in the Telegraph as well about how, despite his insistence that lifting a cap on wealthier pensioners was a bad idea, he seems to have managed to have the same operation secretly done, signed by himself, for himself, the only one recipient of this great deal, while he was head of the DPP.
It's quite amazing, isn't it, Mike, to look at the legislation in this country and see that there is a bill called Keir Starmer QC for his own pension back in 2013. The fact that's on the statute books, his own personalised pension on the statute books of this great nation, is something that I can't quite believe. You know, when do we all get our go, is what I want to know. Why is it one rule for him and one rule for everyone else? Why does he not want more doctors and consultants and head teachers and chief police officers to remain working in our public services? He just can't answer that question. Until he does, no one's going to take him seriously.
No, exactly right. A couple of big items of the day we should discuss. The vote, obviously, on the Windsor Agreement, the Windsor Framework, and also the immigration bill. There's talk of some Tory MPs perhaps putting together an idea or an amendment for that bill to make it possible to kind of bypass the European Court of Human Rights. Is that really necessary? Can we not just kind of avoid taking their guidance anyway?
So you are correct in saying that what happens with the European Court of Human Rights is they issue these interim measures, which are basically not binding us legally, but there's an opinion, sadly I think too often a political opinion from Strasbourg. And essentially what happens is our UK judges tend to too often take those into account, and as we saw with Rwanda, prevent flights from taking off. That's why I would like to see amendments going down that strengthen this legislation to say that a notwithstanding clause to totally ignore the European Court of Human Rights, as well as, Mike, to be perfectly honest, disapplying further sections of the Human Rights Act, like sections 4 and 10, where we know that lawyers will use litigation opportunities to claim that we're breaching convention rights, which wouldn't mean that this is unlawful, but it would put political pressure on ministers to have to change legislation and therefore do it without the consent of the House necessarily, which is terrifying. So I think that there are things we can do. I've been working with a few colleagues, Mike, and I'm sure in the coming 24, 48 hours you'll see those amendments published, and we hope we can get support from across the House to make sure that we can deliver on stopping the boat votes. That's all we want to do,
yes.
and I fully support the Prime Minister in his aims.
And a lot of the talk that I get here from our listeners and our viewers who are very much in support of your policy, as you know, they say, why is it possible, and still in this day and age, for somebody to come here, have their asylum application rejected, and they are then allowed to take an appeal maybe 3 or 4 different times, again and again and again, all on legal aid. And I wonder whether there might be some way of clamping down on that, because when I hear these lefty lawyers talking about, you know, that's their human right, if they are, you know, it would be outrageous if they were to lose their first application, that they would then be deported. Well, why? I'm sorry, I don't get it.
Well, there's a great guy called Richard Eakins who has worked with Policy Exchange, put forward some ideas on how we can make sure this legislation delivers prior to the illegal immigration bill being published for first reading. And I think that one of the things we have to also look at is, at the moment, even if we did remove someone from the United Kingdom to Rwanda, a perfectly safe third country, there could still potentially be a loophole which would allow some sort of human rights appeal, and then enable a judge to say that we would have to return people back to the United Kingdom. We need to close every single one of these legal loopholes, because, like you say, it is an extortionate cost to the British taxpayer. It's nearly £7 million a day that could be going into our schools, which I think is the silver bullet to really levelling up across our country, delivering the education that young people deserve, to enable them to get the jobs, those high-skilled, high-wage jobs that will grow our economy. I think that is the most important thing we can do for levelling up, rather than wasting it, as you say, on legal aid going to these lefty lawyers who are simply lining their pockets at the expense of the taxpayer, as well as obviously seeing hotels being used, which is completely outrageous as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and multiple times, over and over and over again. It's madness. Not quite finally, but the ERG had a meeting this morning. Some Tory MPs are not going to be backing the framework, the Windsor framework. Boris Johnson, we believe, is not going to back it either. Neither is Mark Francois. Are you going to be voting with the government, can you say?
I have informed the Chief Whip and the Prime Minister's office that sadly I will not be able to lend my vote to the government on this particular issue. I think if this was a pure vote on the storm on break, then that would be the right way forward. But sadly, as this is a meaningful vote on the entire deal, which sadly I just don't think truly allows the United Kingdom, with Northern Ireland included, to diverge from EU regulations and rules. I do fear that if we did try to diverge, that what would happen is that we would see Northern Ireland looking separate, or we would fear diverging because we'd have pressure potentially within our own civil service not to do so, for the fear of Northern Ireland being separate as well. And then the fact that it's written into the framework that the EU would have the right, if the storm on break was applied, to basically withdraw if they wish to, or change the rules around the green lane, is simply unacceptable. That gives one side far too much power. I think the provisions within the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill are entirely right, and sadly I do not feel that therefore Northern Ireland is protected under the Act of Union entirely, and I cannot therefore give my support to it today. Yeah,
I spoke to Alex Salmond a little bit earlier on today, and he said if he was the First Minister of Scotland, he'd be asking for similar status for Scotland. There is a danger, he's not obviously the First Minister of Scotland now, but there is a danger that Scotland and or Wales could say, well, we want that as well, isn't there?
Well, this is what I fear, you know, particularly with the Scottish National Party wanting to deflect from their horrendous record of failure when it comes to healthcare, education, and so on. And so I think that, you know, if we had Northern Ireland being entirely separately treated and able to obviously remain what the SNP would like, which is closely aligned with EU rules and regulations, this could potentially break up our union. And actually, I think there's so many great opportunities outside of the European Union, moving away from these, some cases, petty regulations and rules that hinder business from growing in our great nation. And Northern Ireland should not be treated any differently to any other part of our United Kingdom. Otherwise, we're just lending ourselves, sadly, towards a United Ireland, which is the last thing I want to see, and would obviously clearly go against the aims of the Good Friday Agreement.
No, absolutely right. Final question, Jonathan, on Boris Johnson this afternoon, 2 o'clock. We're calling it the fight back. I'm not sure that this is anything other than just a bit of a kangaroo court and possible waste of public money and public time. People will watch it, people will be glued to it. Some people, though, I think it doesn't really need to be happening.
Look, Mike, when I go out door knocking across Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk, as I am doing all like I do every Thursday, Friday and Sunday morning, what comes up on doorsteps is, can you please halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut NHS waiting lists and stop the boats. No one's interested in this any further. This is a Westminster bubble story. I think that there are lots of question marks, particularly now being brought up in light of comments made by the chair in the past of the committee with regards to Boris Johnson. I think obviously the Sue Gray has muddied the water somewhat. Unfortunately, I do think Sue's got a fantastic reputation, but I think she's hindered that herself by the decision she made to immediately go and wish to be working for Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party to put them in government. And I just think that this, like you say, is a bit of a bubble story that really the rest of the country is more worried about heating and eating, and I think that's what I'm more interested in focusing on as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Jonathan, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Jonathan Gullis there, Conservative MP for Stoke-on-Trent North.